So I'm Martina King, a librarian here at MacEwan University Library. Also with us is my colleague Joan Morrison and our co-moderator Irfan Chaudhry, Director of MacEwan's Office of Human Rights, Diversity and Equity. So you will, participants and attendees are going to be muted throughout, but you can ask questions in the Q&A or in the chat for Cathryn to answer when she's finished telling her stories. Also, we are going to be recording today, and a human library is an exchange of personal human experiences. So this Black History Month, we are so fortunate to share the lived experiences of Black Canadians with you. So we're asking everyone to keep their questions respectful and to listen with open ears and an open heart, as today is all about learning. As you participate in the Human Library, this could bring up unexpected emotions. And if you find the event difficult, you can choose to leave or come back at any time. And if you feel distressed and want someone to talk to about what's been brought up for you, there's a number of resources available to you both on and off campus. So please do reach out to myself or Joan, and we can refer you to those services. Many of us are located in Treaty 6 territory, the traditional gathering place for many Indigenous peoples, including the Cree, Métis, Nakota Sioux, Iroquois, Dene, Anishinaabe, and Inuit, among others. I honor and respect the histories, languages, ceremonies, and culture of the Indigenous peoples who call this land home. They have valuable lessons to teach us. I'm continually learning about the scale, scope, and history of racial discrimination faced by people of African descent globally and here in Canada. I recognize how the violent historical legacy of the transatlantic slave trade is connected with the ongoing systematic racism experienced by people of African descent in Canada. Libraries, as colonial institutions, have played a role in the suppression of diverse voices by privileging white European voices and text. And today we're going to use the structure of the Human Library to amplify the voice of Black Canadians so we can learn from their experiences. Libraries must ensure that knowledge, perspectives, and stories of Black peoples are represented in our collections and fight to break down the barriers in academia and publishing which discriminate against these voices. Stories such as Cathryn Heslep's are so very important for shining light on possible academic paths. But it falls to those of us in academic institutions to make these paths equitable, welcoming, and rewarding. So we are so pleased to have Cathryn Heslep with us today to tell her story, The Many Faces of Me, the story of a Canadian Black woman working in higher education. Cathryn holds an MA in leadership and completed doctoral coursework in higher education at the University of Calgary. She has held positions at MacEwan such as Registrar, Vice President of Student Services, and recently was the first student ombudsperson at MacEwan University. Cathryn has always been a trailblazer and a fierce student advocate. She is also an Amber Valley descendant. Amber Valley was first settled in 1910, about 160 kilometers north of Edmonton, and was one of the largest settlements in Western Canada of African Americans fleeing segregation and violence. Cathryn is the daughter of a Canada Post letter carrier whose grandfather was an original settler of Amber Valley. Welcome, Cathryn.
Thank you so much, Martina. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Cathryn Heslep. Thank you so much for the time you have taken to participate in this session. I'm going to now share my screen. So you have The Many Faces of a Canadian Black Woman. As stated by Martina, I too acknowledge that the land on which I stand is in Treaty 6 territory, and I thank the original inhabitants for their care of the lands, lakes, and rivers. The title I provided for this session was this: I did not know there was a generic name for who I am until someone recently asked me about my experiences as being BIPOC. From my perspective, people are so much more than labels, and I will share and discuss the story of how my varied experiences prepared me for my last, and that's a question mark, working role. Thank you for your interest in my book, and I look forward to our discussions following the presentation. As an overview, I'm going to provide you with a brief preamble and my lived experience. I'm going to talk about who I am and my background, as Martina said, beginning with Amber Valley. I'd like to talk about the influence of my parents and my family. I do want to share a tale of two grandfathers. I'd like to speak about the major influences on my life as a Canadian, Black, woman, and senior higher education administrator. I'd like to talk about my work life and beyond. And finally, I'm going to end with what I know for sure. To provide context to the Black experience in Edmonton, I offer the following. According to the 2016 census data, the total population in Alberta was a little over 4 million. The Black population was 74,435. Of the major cities in Edmonton, that is those over 1 million, Edmonton had a Black population of 5.9% of the total, with Calgary at 4.2 and Red Deer at 1.8. And I'm going to pause there. The 1.8 in Red Deer is I'm going to talk about that a little bit later. Please note that this discussion is a focus of my lived experience, as I cannot speak for others. In fact, I am aware of friends and relatives who of similar age and location who describe vastly different experiences than mine. I respect them and their experiences and appreciate that they have endured difficult challenges. It is important to hear and understand varied perspectives because, after all, we are all individuals with different lived experiences. I consider myself so fortunate that some of the issues they share either do not reflect my life or, from my perspective, have been relatively minor and not worthy of my time to dwell on. That said, I am not so naive as to state that I have never experienced racism. It is only events such as this that I immerse myself in such discussions. I'm sharing my background with you as it has shaped my perspective and explains my lived experiences. I also agreed to do this presentation because I believe it is important to discuss issues of race, gender, intersectionality, as it is through dialogue that we learn and appreciate other perspectives. Also, as I had to learn the acronym BIPOC after my friend asked about my experiences, just to be clear, it stands for Black, Indigenous, Person of Color. I was born in Edmonton and grew up in the 50s and 60s on the north side, which at that time was primarily lower middle class, predominantly white Canadian. Parents who bought new tract houses to give their children a better life than they had experienced. There were few families in our neighborhood who had traveled beyond Canada and the USA, and fewer still who had immigrated to Canada. I attended 3 different new elementary schools due to the post-war baby boom creating a burgeoning suburb where I lived. In high school, Queen Elizabeth Composite High School, I auditioned and successfully joined the All-City Choir, Centennial Singers, as well as the school choir, played team sports, and was in the orchestra. For my family and I, a major part of life was attending a large downtown church, which was predominantly white with few people of color. My friends and our family's friends were all white. While attending the University of Alberta for my undergrad, there was somewhat more diversity in classes, but almost zero Black students in arts courses. But to be honest, I was more comfortable with my increasing circle of white friends. My siblings and I chose white marriage partners. My parents and their siblings were all born in Western Canada, mostly Edmonton. My grandparents, however, immigrated from various southern states. I now have a better sense of the journey of my paternal ancestors because their history has been discussed and chronicled. I attribute this information to various books, documents, and reunion events, especially acknowledging the work of fellow Amber Valley descendant Cheryl Fogo. Also, you may have heard extensive background provided by Deborah Dobbins in the forum yesterday. My second cousin, Debbie Beaver, has done extensive work on the history of Black settlers, which was published on the U of A's Gateway newsletter last week. I also appreciate the work of Jenna Bailey, who produced the documentary, We Are the Roots, and Selwyn Jacobs, who directed The Road Taken, the stories of Black sleeping car porters. Most recently, Charles Sanders has done extensive research into the Heslep and Jones, my maternal grandmother, families, and the CBC recently interviewed Kushali Mitra, who wrote about my relative, Judy Singh, for the Edmonton Heritage Council. Growing up, I had limited knowledge of my heritage, other than the occasional visits to the farm, my dad's uncle's farms in Amber Valley. My paternal grandfather, Willis Reese Bowen, 1875 to 1975. He was one of a group of Black settlers who arrived in 1911 from the southern United States, ostensibly to escape the Jim Crow laws. His eldest daughter, Mary, became my grandmother. Relatives and friends have done research and continue to understand the times, have found articles in the Edmonton Journal prohibiting the migration of Blacks. However, my great-grandparents and their fellow settlers persevered, settled, and farmed the land in 5 sites. Campsie, which is located near Barhead, Junkins, which became Wildwood, Amber Valley, originally named Pine Creek, which is near Athabasca, and Keystone, later Breton. Others settled in Maidstone, Saskatchewan. My paternal grandparents, Robert Dwight and Mary Scytha Nee Bowen Heslep, met and married in Amber Valley, Alberta. He had traveled from Texas and Oklahoma north to Amber Valley, seeking his fortune as a farmer. He purchased a parcel of land, returned to Texas to bring his parents to Canada, and married my grandmother. As his father died shortly after arriving in Canada, he moved his mother, Jenny, to Edmonton, and with his degree in agriculture, began his life's career in the poultry section at Swift Canadian, a meat packing plant. This is a picture of one of those wonderful reunions at Amber Valley. They raised a family of 6 surviving children as a daughter died in infancy in a small home in North Edmonton. Their children became World War II veterans, first Black teacher for the correspondence school book branch, and the first Black secretary for the provincial government in Edmonton. They welcomed 10 grandchildren, including Edmonton's first Black fire service captain, and he's the baby there in the middle, a human resource professional, a city administrator in Denver, 2 funeral directors, a model, actress, and a retired higher education administrator. And you'll see some of those there. Their youngest son became my father. My parents, Lonnie Scotty and Joyce Heslep, met and married in Edmonton on June 25th, 1951. He had served in World War II in Europe and was wounded in Holland in 1944. After working as a porter, my father completed a long career with Canada Post, and my mother enjoyed various secretarial roles in secondary and higher education. They raised 3 children, also in North Edmonton. My father, one of his brothers, and several of his uncles were porters on the CNR and CPR railways. My father's brother, Hilliard Earl, worked his way up from porter to retiring as a conductor from CNR via. As children, my siblings and my cousins were fascinated by these men who got to ride the trains all the time and who we had impromptu visits with at the train station. I do not recall my father, his uncles, or my uncle ever complaining about the treatment they received as sleeping car porters, and they were never called George, the pejorative term used for Black porters, and this was reported by Larry Johnsrud in the Edmonton Journal in 2005. One thing was clear to my immediate family. Our experience living in Edmonton was particularly different than that of the relatively recent Black immigrants from the Caribbean and African nations, starting in the 1960s. Our family socialized with and entertained white friends and neighbors. As I prepared this presentation, I thought of my parents and the values and principles they espoused and passed on to their children. I recall my father working several concurrent jobs and my mother being outside of the 1960s norm by working mostly full-time. They worked to provide us a home, music lessons, the occasional short holiday, all while being fully committed to their church as church leaders. Around our dinner table, there was never any concerns expressed about racism or discrimination. If something went amiss, they did not lay blame. If there was an incident of racism against us, they chalked it up to bad behavior in individuals, not an entire race. There were very few incidents of racism that I recall. I do remember, however, being so shocked in junior high by a junior high teacher who pointedly and deliberately used the N-word to say the colloquial name for Brazil nuts. My classmates were angry and shocked, as was I. However, I regret to this day that I did not raise the issue with the teacher or administration. My maternal grandfather, however, described negative experiences such as racism and prejudice, which I will discuss later, but that was not prevalent in our dealings. We applied for and were successful in gaining employment and did not ever feel that we were not employable because of our race. I found out in my father's last days that he had always wanted to be an accountant, but was told that profession was not open to him, a Black man 60 years ago. Our family, though it was mostly unspoken, held a number of firsts. Raymond Alexander Heslep, Dad's older brother, was the first Black baby born at the Royal Alexander Hospital. His son Dwight was the first Black fire service captain who trained firefighters in Edmonton. My father was the first Black letter carrier in Edmonton. My aunt was the first Black teacher at the correspondence school branch. My mother was the first Black secretary with the federal government in Edmonton. Growing up, I had few formal role models other than my aunts and uncles, except Marian Anderson. I recall my mother speaking with almost reverence for the work of the American Black contralto, Marian Anderson, which as a child inspired me. As a classical musician with little training, her voice and her onstage presence was regal and warm. She was scheduled to sing in Constitution Hall in Washington, D.C., but was prevented from doing so because of her race. However, she went on to sing before a massive outdoor audience of 75,000 at the Lincoln Memorial. She left the US and traveled to Europe where she trained and performed as she was welcomed into the great concert halls. Upon her return to the US, she performed widely and was awarded a Lifetime Achievement Award. She paved the way for other Black opera singers, particularly Leontine Price and Paul Robeson. I was influenced by the way she, an American woman of color, succeeded in her persistence by not letting racism triumph to help other Black singers and it has been my desire to pave the way for young racialized women to seek out and embrace successful careers in higher education. I was awarded that privilege when a young female student asked me to be her leadership mentor a couple of years while she was a student ambassador. And you can see her right there. My work life began in customer service in department store sales. As I was honored for my work with putting children at ease who were getting new shoes, my manager shared with me that I was almost not hired because of a poor experience with a previous Black employee in the same department. To me, this was not an issue of discrimination, but a lack of experience in working with other cultures. It really did not occur to me that I would not land a job at 16 because of my race. As I continued to work for that store, eventually I was moved into staff training department to train new employees in customer service and sales. However, I would like to share what happened when I did land my first job. I will call this the tale of two grandfathers. As the eldest granddaughter on one side and the eldest grandchild on the other, my grandparents were particularly important in my life. We lived relatively close to them, and I saw both sets at least once a week. When I went to share the great news of my new part-time after-school job at a large department store, one grandfather was not at all encouraging. He was surprised that I got the job and assured me that I would soon be fired because of my race. He believed that all the challenges he had in employment were due solely to his race and required him to move his family many times, including his school-aged children. This is my first recollection of what may be perceived as systemic racism. Out of respect, I did not debate the issue with my grandfather, but I felt that I no longer had anything to discuss with him. Conversely, my other grandfather was delighted when I shared the news and was immensely proud that I sought the job and encouraged me to get involved with profit sharing, as it was a great company to work for. This grandfather regularly asked me about my work, and I was happy to share all the wonderful things about customer service that I had been taught by managers and colleagues. I remember him sitting in his granddad chair, smiling and chuckling at my enthusiasm for this great job, selling shoes. I consider myself fortunate that I was able to devote my entire career to higher education. I had supportive and encouraging mentors who reflected the importance of service to students. I began as a student records clerk at the University of Alberta and was supervised by a woman who embraced the concept of service to students and expected it in her staff. This provided the background needed to continue into increasing more senior roles in higher education. As a woman in the workplace, there are often additional challenges to overcome. When I became a single mom through separation, I needed to find a better employment opportunity for my son and I, whereupon I found work as associate, then registrar at Olds College. I had to move away from my friends and my family, a 2-hour drive from my primary support systems. My supervisor, also a single mother, cleared the path for me to be fully engaged in my work as a working mom. I found a suitable daycare, but discovered that the management, a mom who did not work outside of the home, did not understand the needs and challenges of working parents. So my supervisor and I got elected to the board for the daycare and were able to make changes to improve the services for our children. We worked together well, often spelling each other off by sharing the pickup of our children when one of us had late meetings. She set the stage for being an excellent employee and leader by modeling her expectations. I will never forget the day I started. My nameplate was on my office door and there was a plaque on my desk. This plaque has followed me and sat on my desk or in my office throughout the rest of my career. And I dare say it has served me and my colleagues well. I will read it for you. The student is, a quote attributed to William W. Perky. The student is the most important person on campus. Without students, there would be no need for the institution. Not a cold enrollment statistic, but a flesh and blood human being with feelings and emotions like our own. Not someone to be tolerated so that we can do our thing. They are our thing. Not dependent on us, rather we are dependent on them. Not an interruption of our work, but the purpose of it. We are not doing them a favor by serving them. They are doing us a favor by giving us the opportunity to do so. I left Olds to return to Edmonton for better supports for my son. Living in central Alberta had been challenging from a racial perspective. Remember, I lived and worked just down the road from Jim Keegstra, the high school teacher and mayor, a Holocaust denier who was charged with the willful promotion of hatred. That case, which was fought all the way to the same court, to the Supreme Court, I'm sorry, and he was convicted of hate speech. While I do not recall examples of overt or systemic racism, my time there in small town central Alberta was uncomfortable for my son and me. I did not have the language or opportunity to share my feelings, but the sense of racial sentiments was palpable. Upon moving back to Edmonton in 1989, I became the registrar at MacEwan. In very short order, my concerns were allayed. Never did I experience any concerns of racism from colleagues or students. I enjoyed excellent working relationships with senior administrators, colleagues, and staff, as evidenced on being awarded an Outstanding Service Award in 1994 and the MacEwan Medallion in 2015. I worked hard to model the behavior that would serve my staff, the students, my colleagues, and the institution well. I admit being surprised when Black students asked me where I was from. When I confirmed that I was born in a hospital a few blocks from the campus, they then asked me about my parents and then my grandparents. I saw these questions as curiosity that provided me with an opportunity to share the story of Amber Valley. I always embrace these queries as learning opportunities and not as racist behavior. My work at MacEwan, frankly, was my life. Starting as the registrar at what was then Grant MacEwan Community College, to a broader portfolio as Executive Director, Student Services, and finally retiring for the first time after 10 years as Vice President, Student Services. After a year's sabbatical, I was rehired as MacEwan University's first student ombudsperson. Following my second retirement in April 2020, I became a member of the retirees of MacEwan University and have been elected to their leadership group. In my roles as VP students and then student ombuds, I receive student concerns and allegations, particularly issues in the classroom. I received several complaints from white students about the use of the N-word and how they were offended on behalf of the Black and Brown students in the classroom. I must state categorically that I am most offended by use of that word, and I believe it has no place in decent discourse. However, when inquiring into the language in the classroom, I found that the context and learning situation was important to understand, and I strove mightily to help the students understand. I then encouraged the students to seek out the professor as soon as possible to discuss their concerns. I also received notices and worked with colleagues and students on allegations of systemic racism. I am forever grateful for the work of Irfan Chaudhry, the Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, for his wise counsel and assistance in navigating those challenging waters. Prior to retirement, I was invited to sit on the board of governors of a small faith-based Mennonite university in Winnipeg as an external representative with higher education experience. Within the board context, I provide input to policies, finances, and decisions through the lens of service to students. I am so incredibly grateful for the interest in the Black community, specifically those Black settlers from 100 years ago who succeeded and grew families who are now major contributors to Alberta society. I am ending my portion of this discussion with a call to action, or in Oprah's words, what I know for sure. While I am very appreciative of all the efforts, time, and resources that go into celebrating Black History Month, my hope is that the knowledge and understanding gleaned from events such as this human library will be adopted and discussed widely, not just in February. I concur with Deborah Dobbins, who stated that there must be deliberate and accurate inclusion of our history and the contributions we made to the West's success, included in the present and future Alberta kindergarten curriculum through grade 12 for the education curriculum. I trust that you are encouraged to become a global citizen by taking opportunities to learn and understand different cultures, races, genders, and religions. Take time to engage with individuals to better understand their perspectives. Remember that people are so much more than labels. individuals bring their own stories to share. When you observe any kind of racist act or any form of harassment, no matter what your own color, seek to become an ally or an intervener. My thanks goes to Joan Morrison and Martina King of the MacEwan University Library for facilitating this event. Thanks also to Dr. Irfan Chaudhry, the Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, for seeing the need to celebrate Black History Month at MacEwan University. I want to thank my husband, Doug, for his superb editing expertise, and thank you all. There's some resources for you, and here's how to get in touch with me. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Cathryn, for sharing that. Your passion is so evident for teaching on this topic and other topics. So I also wanted to thank Irfan Chaudhry, Justine Dogby, and Valerie Odrego, Dr. Valerie Odrego, for providing support for this event today. And thank you so much for sharing your history, Cathryn. It's just fascinating. So I wanted to open it up. If anyone has questions that they would like to ask, they can put it in the Q&A or in the chat. This is a golden opportunity. Perhaps, well, we're waiting. I wanted to ask you, Cathryn, what kind of advice would you offer to Black women who are embarking on an academic journey?
Well, the first thing I would say is go for it. There's no life like it, having spent more than 30 years in higher education. The most important thing, of course, is to start with a solid education background. And as I understand it now, of course, in academic life in a university or a college or a technical institution, the expertise of having a degree behind you is so important. So do that, strive to pursue. I'm speaking to myself at the time. I have not finished my doctorate. I got waylaid by a number of things. I don't know if I will, but I do strongly encourage anybody to absolutely go for it. Get the education, find an institution that suits your needs, and certainly go for it. I believe that certainly MacEwan University and other institutions are very, very accepting and very much accepting of a diverse population. I also think it's important to have in front of students faculty who are diverse. I think it's important that students are able to see themselves replicated and be able to seek out a faculty member if they have some challenges, or to be able to seek out someone in student services, or if there is a student ombuds, to find them if they're having any challenges.
Are you reading the chat?
I am reading the chat.
Okay.
So it's, thank you for sharing your story. It's good to see you, and you're missed at MacEwan. Thank you for that, Alyssa. The question is, were you given any reasons why the ombuds position at MacEwan wasn't replaced if, as you say, and I wholeheartedly agree, that the students in the foundation are the foundation of the university? I was not. I certainly know that, so I'll give you a little background on that, actually. On January 15th, I was invited in to meet with the provost and the president. And so I had sort of a sense of what that would look like. And those of you who are in higher ed in Alberta would certainly understand that there has been significant budget issues, major budget challenges. And so they were there to tell me that my position, like a number of others, had to be cut for budget purposes. I was given the wonderful opportunity to stay till the end of the term, which I think was really great. I purposely did not tell students that I was leaving at the end of April because the students I was seeing at the time were deep in the midst of appeal processes, disciplinary issues. And I think the last thing they needed to know was that I wouldn't be there after. So it was literally on the last day that I sent emails to all the students I was working with, and I did a lot of handoff as much as I could, but I have not heard, and to be frank, I feel it would be a little disingenuous for me to call them up and ask why it's not there anymore.
I just wanted to make sure that the other comments are noted. So Danielle says, thank you for sharing your story. Susan Cooper says, thanks, Cathryn, thoroughly enjoyed. Great to see you again. And then from Katie Singh, who you mentioned, hi, Cathryn, my husband walked by as I was listening and saw some of the photos, and he was saying, that must be Dwight. I know Ray. Hey, that's Janice. His dad, Daryl Singh, is Dwight's cousin, and I believe that makes you his cousin as well. So maybe...
Well, it's kind of interesting because in our family, two brothers married two cousins. So Dwight's mom, Helen, who is still alive and who is, I think, about 94, is not only my aunt, but she's also my second cousin. And so we, of course, spent a lot of time with the Singh family, and I just recently connected with Tara and Katie and her mom, and it's just so great to connect through Facebook.
Yes, how wonderful having all of this rich family connection. There's a question here. Hi, Cathryn, thanks for sharing with us today. Do you believe that there is more acceptance of BIPOC persons in the larger Alberta cities than in rural Alberta? From Colleen.
Well, thank you for that question, Colleen. So my experience is relatively limited in terms of small cities. And in fact, well, I can tell you, I have just this summer moved to a small city. I now live in St. Albert. But certainly my experience in the late 80s in Olds was such that there was little acceptance of Black people, literally because there weren't very many in the area. So I do believe my personal experience would be that cities are more welcoming. And I think that, you know, as a longtime Edmontonian, we have grown up and we have become much better people. We have become much more educated and accepting of people of different races and creeds and religions and genders. And I think that is just, I can't be more proud of my fellow Edmontonians and Albertans for doing that. I also want to say a shout out to MLA David Shepherd. So it's really wonderful to have somebody who is of color at the legislature and making wonderful, wonderful recommendations and policy decisions. So I think we're much better off. From Megan, a question from Megan. Hi, Megan. I really identify with your student-centered approach to your career. How can those that are non-racialized allies best support BIPOC students in the post-secondary world as non-instructors? Great question, Megan. And if it's the Megan I think it is, you already do. But in any event, I think really being open. And so having those students hear you speak and hear you talk about your life and how you experience all those kind of diversity kinds of issues is one of the ways that you can. I don't think, to be honest, I think that students at MacEwan from my 30 plus years there were very open to speak with anybody that they found an open chair. And so some of you will know, for example, in my office, there was an open chair and there was a table full of candies and stuff. And I think that, you know, students told me that when they knew that they could come in and have a candy and just sit and talk with me, that was one of those issues. So I think also I think it would be remiss of me not to mention the importance of looking at the literature. There are scores and scores of documents and research around looking after students, particularly higher ed students. And in fact, I'm reading a book right now. It's a novel, but it's about a university. I'm not sure I'd recommend it yet, but I'm about halfway through. But essentially that, that the question is, are there any books that specifically impacted or inspired you as a young BIPOC woman pursuing higher ed? You know what, I will tell you that up until the last day of work, I read The Chronicle of Higher Ed. And one of the things I found with that particular book is, publication, was that it also provided just a wide range of student-related issues and student supports and all kinds of things that one could use and in terms of understanding students. Any books that particularly inspired me as a young BIPOC student? Not really, I would say. To be honest, the ones that interested me, my major was psychology, and so I was interested in those kinds of books, but nothing particularly. And to be honest, I don't believe I actually read many books around racialized individuals at the time. I hope that answered the question.
Well, that was definitely a question near to my heart as a librarian.
Yes.
But there were a couple of related questions higher up that I wanted to make sure got asked.
Okay.
So if possible, how do BIPOC professionals in higher ed address their experiences of systemic racism without impact on their career advancement? Do we just ignore it?
Hands down, no, do not ignore it. Do not, let me say categorically, do not ignore it. I am hoping that there would be somebody on campus that you would feel would be an ally that you could talk with and that you could speak to. Whether it's in human resources or whether it's in your own department, I would hope that there is someone with whom you could talk to that wouldn't have an impact on your career. There might be the concern around going to human resources, but certainly colleagues, if you're at MacEwan, I can tell you there are tremendous colleagues around campus who you can go to. I mentioned Irfan's department, diversity, equity, and inclusion. They're an amazing group of folks who can also point you in the right directions.
Thank you. There was one other question. There was a comment first. Wow, I was also born in Edmonton, and I really wanted to say thank you. You're certainly offering wisdom for the actual effective growth of love and equality in our city and world. And then a question from Marguerite. Can you give concrete actions for allyship?
I hope this is my good friend Marguerite, and if it is, hi and thank you for joining in. If it is not, thank you for joining in any event. I think, and Marguerite asked, can you give concrete actions for allyship? Concrete actions for allyship to me would be walking alongside an individual. And just by walking alongside, talking to them, having conversations with them, point them to resources if necessary, but just simply to be there for them and listen deeply. One of the things as an ombuds, the key thing that one does as an ombuds is listen. And so the whole opportunity that you can have for listening to somebody, to understand, listen for understanding, and understand where they're coming from and what their challenges are. And don't feel that you have to have a Band-Aid approach. It could be a long time kind of process that you do in coming alongside them as being an ally with them. Hi, Megan from the Athletic Services. Hi.
Yes, you're getting lots of shout outs. She says, so wonderful to see and hear from you. The staff and students miss you, of course. Yes. For sure we do.
Well, and I miss them, I have to say, I do.
So I'm just checking to see if in the Q&A, so I think the next one in the Q&A, we had sort of an allyship question, right, for Megan, and then Cheryl, how do you manage the systemic nature of racism in education? Are there ways in which the educational system, particularly post-secondary, have made room for other perspectives on learning and teaching in addition to curricula, for example?
Okay, I'm going to read that thoroughly again.
Yeah, in the Q&A.
Yes, I see that, yeah. Are there ways in which the educational system, particularly post-secondary, have made room for other perspectives on learning and teaching in addition to curricula, for example? I'm going to give a shout out to my colleagues who work in student services or student affairs. I think that they have they have in the past and continue to do a remarkable work in working alongside the curriculum. I think that they're also there to address and and I'm using walk alongside a lot, and address the issues of systemic racism in education, excuse me. I think too that they kind of play an interesting role, because what they can do is, without impacting the academic outcomes for a particular student, they can, because they come from outside typically of the academic arena, they can actually raise those concerns and raise them at the most senior levels. And I would encourage people to not be afraid to talk to the most senior student services or student affairs individual in your institution, and have that conversation with them.
Thank you. Yes, Cheryl has a follow-up question. How do you respond to people that suggest we are addressing racism because we have affirmative action? Do we have affirmative action in education?
Well, I certainly hope not. One of the things I have to say that in all my time, and particularly as I moved up in terms of seniority, in the back of my head, I had concerns that this was happening simply because of my color. And I worked very hard and asked people, particularly those around me, and some of you will know the wonderful team I had around me. One of the things I always asked them, I said, you need to share with me if there's something that you're seeing that that's not going well, or that I'm not doing well. You need to tell me if the emperor is not wearing any clothes. And I was just so delighted that they felt free to do that. I certainly hope that there is not, that it is not affirmative action. I think that as people bring to the table their education, their solid education, if they're an academic, a solid research portfolio, all those kinds of things that make for a great employee, and that the position is appropriate for them, that there's a good fit, there's a good knit in terms of what they're doing, that I don't believe that there is affirmative action around. I did not point this out because to me it's not very important, but for most of my time as, I would say for a good deal of my time as vice president, I was the youngest and the only Black vice president. And for a time, I was also the only woman, sorry, second youngest, and the only woman. So I don't think that that is in place, and I can only speak for MacEwan in that regard.
Just looking for any questions that haven't been asked or anything new that's coming in.
I don't see anything that we've missed right now, Martina.
Okay. Well, I see a thank you. Thank you so much, Cathryn, for sharing your rich family history, contextualized as part of Alberta's history that many of us did not grow up learning about. Thank you also for sharing the wisdom stemming from your lived experience and long career. And wonderful to see you again.
Thank you.
From Sandy Stift to the library. I wondered if there are no other questions. I had one other question for you. There was recently a rally at the legislature. I suppose it was from a group called Walk for Freedom Alberta that was officially protesting COVID-19 public health measures. But some of their material for gathering people for this referenced the white nationalist rally in Charlottesville, Virginia in 2017. And there were reports of people carrying tiki torches. And I was just wondering if you had seen any of the articles, or if you had any thoughts or feelings around that happening as someone who has such deep roots in Alberta.
You know, I don't. I did not see those. And I know, certainly following social media as I have, there are certainly lots of opinions on the perspective that the health requirements around COVID-19 are causing people to be concerned, and it doesn't allow them to be their own person. As the leader of a church board, I can tell you it's a very interesting spot to be in as well. But I can't actually say I've seen those, so I can't really offer an opinion.
Well, thanks for considering anything in any case. It's just so wonderful to have you sharing your wisdom with us. So I just didn't want to miss any other messages. Lots of thanks. This has been so beneficial. Thanks for sharing your expertise and experience. I'm honored to be able to hear and see you today. That was from Cheryl. And there's another Cheryl as well. And thank you for sharing your family story. It was an engaging event, and I'm already deep into a Canadian encyclopedia about Amber Valley. I look forward to furthering my knowledge about Black Canadian settlers. So thank you for this initial information. Indeed. So Joan is saying that a recording of this event will be posted on MacEwan's YouTube channel. So there are other events going on at MacEwan. If you Google Black History Month MacEwan, you'll get to our main page. But I'm seeing no other questions for now. So I think we're gonna bring the session to a close. Thank you so very much for being here.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. And thank you, everyone, for dialing in. Much appreciated.
Okay. Bye, everybody.